Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Great Data Debate. My name is Mike Ferguson, your conference chairman, and it's a really great pleasure to have four very distinguished people on the show here today in the Great Data Debate. We've come a long way, so thank you all for surviving on this time zone versus your normal time zone. All right, let's just quickly introduce everybody. I'll start with ladies first. So. Shinji Kim is CEO and founder of SelectStar. SelectStar is an automated data discovery platform. Prior to that, she was CEO of Concord Systems, which was a data infrastructure startup, which was acquired by Akamai. And then she worked on their IoT data platform. And prior to that, she worked at various places, YieldMo, and other ones as well. Next to me is Benoit Dageville, co-founder and president of products at Snowflake. So Benoit is a little bit like my background in parallel databases. He's a leading expert in that and in self-tuning database systems. Prior to co-founding Snowflake, he was 10 years at Oracle as the lead architect on parallel execution of the Oracle RAC capability, and a key architect in the SQL management group. Before that, again, still in parallel systems at Bull. Welcome, Benoit.
Thank you.
Tomer Shiran, co-founder and head of products at Dremio. So Tomer is a long time in the world of SQL access to all kinds of structured data and semi-structured and unstructured. Of course, Dremio is an open data lakehouse platform, and he was the original CEO of Dremio, raising over $400 million in venture capital there. Prior to that, Tomer was the fourth employee at MapR, working, of course, on the Apache Drill product there. And then prior to that, was in engineering roles both at Microsoft and IBM Research. So welcome, Tomer.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Chris Gladwin is founder and CEO of Ocient. Chris originally founded CleverSafe, which generated over 1,000 patents as a storage object vendor. And after raising over 100 million in funding for that, he exited that with an acquisition to IBM for $1.4 billion. And prior to CleverSafe, he was at MusicNow and also at Cruise Technologies and Zenith Data Systems. Welcome, guys. So, as always, I'd just like to start the show and start the debate with a little bit of questions about the economy. Of course, this time last year, we were coming out of a pandemic, so kind of nobody knew what to expect. But it seems now that we're in another interesting sort of situation. You know, we've now got a world economy that seems to be slowing. In fact, the International Monetary Fund was quoting on like growth halving in size over recent years. We've got companies tightening their belts. A lot of consumers out there obviously tightening their belts as well. So I'm kind of interested as to if you've seen any of your customers, if that's changed anything in your customers. I mean, in terms of what they're focused on, you know, is it that you're seeing them accelerating their move to the cloud to go to a subscription model perhaps because of that? Or is it that you're seeing things like focus on cost reduction? Or is it customer retention? What are you seeing amongst your customer base? Has there been any impact with a weakened economy by the pandemic, followed by what we're seeing now with all of this going on?
Well, at Ocient, what we do is we make the largest data analyzing systems in the world. So we focus on the top 1,000 or so largest data analyzing organizations. So we have a really good view of what that class of gigantic customer does. And what you've seen in the economy is even though the growth is slowing, it's slowing from an all-time record high. I mean, US companies recently reported their highest rate of earnings ever. So the really large companies are doing wonderfully. And even though the overall economy is slowing in its growth, it continues this shift, which was accelerated by the pandemic, to more of a digital economy. So companies who are sitting in this room and most of our customers are still doing pretty well. And what the problems they're having aren't, they don't have money. Their problem is, I want to grow faster, I want to be more efficient.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I cannot say too much because we are a public traded company. But if you look at our past quarter, it was very good. And I think indeed there is an acceleration, to moving to the cloud. Because both of cost, you can, really lower your cost. So people who have been thinking about, migrating workload, on-premise workload to the cloud are accelerating these migrations. And so you can lower the cost and do much more in the cloud. So there is these two effects. So it helps to accelerate, movement to the cloud. So we are benefiting from it somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd say is, a lot of customers now of ours leveraging data to either save money or increase their revenue. And in fact, I was just yesterday meeting one of our kind of UK based customers and really using the product to analyze a lot of IoT data and catch kind of people that are not paying what they should be paying, or they call it revenue assurance, but had an immediate impact on the top line. So I think that's just as important, in addition to, of course, reducing costs. And I think there's also the aspect of, like, what am I paying for my infrastructure, right? What are they paying for our product, for other products? So there's definitely seeing more of folks asking, okay, is this path of spending that I'm on with the current infrastructure, my data infrastructure, is that sustainable for the future, or do you need something that's more, going to be more inexpensive, more open, etc.?
Yeah, I don't think moving to the cloud is really slowing down anytime soon or nowadays. But if anything, there is maybe a reprioritization of the analytics project, or how they want to structure the team. And instead of hiring, like 5 more analysts, you may want to focus on some of the automation effort or having some tooling effort to make sure that everyone's a lot more productive in their own role.
Okay. All right, so let's get away from the economy and start looking a little bit more at a couple of trends that I've certainly seen. I mean, certainly for me, it seems to be more and more going into database. We've now got data engineering growing, more and more people doing data engineering. A lot of those data engineering tools seem to be generating SQL, pushing work down into databases. Initiatives like data mesh, trying to drive up the number of data engineers to get past the logjam of, say, centralized IT groups that are out of resources and can't keep pace with demand. And so overall, it just seems more and more going in there. And I noticed also that Snowflake announced a kind of application framework earlier this year, right? And so I think also encouraging software developers with intelligent apps to integrate analytics into intelligent apps. So more and more of that going into the database as well, even in database analytics and things. So I'm kind of curious, are we going back to client server here? I mean, it seems to be...
No, it's a good point. So that's very true, right? It used to be that the last thing you wanted to do is to push compute too much into the database, because the database had very finite, resources. Mm-hmm. So you could, basically not do that. Now with cloud and with this, very different architecture than this traditional system, where you can run, side by side different workload on their own dedicated compute resources, you can dramatically, grow, what you can push down, and there is no limit, effectively. So
really,
indeed,
you think it's just unlimited scalability?
It is unlimited scale, because and I can explain a little bit why. First, there is the data aspect, right? When we talk about scale in the data, is scaling the data size. So, with cloud and blob storage, you have very cheap, storage, which can, go to petabyte scale. And of course, the trick there is not so much to store petabytes data, is to really understand the nature of this data such that you can query this data very efficiently and quickly, because you never want to scan 1 petabyte of data.
Obviously.
But so you can scale there, but the compute is the more interesting thing, right? In the past, this database system, you said DBMS, but all DBMS are built on this single, cluster where, all the compute. So if you centralize the data, you had to centralize the compute, and everything had to run on this cluster, and that would become the bottleneck. So, people actually try to offload. You have data marts and silos of data, and, it's very common for big organizations to have many, data solutions. So now with the cloud, you can run these different workloads on their own dedicated, compute, so you can scale really infinitely, and that's the magic. So indeed, it has bring this new era of pushing as much as possible, compute and logic, where the data is, and one of the reasons is governance, right? Data governance. I'm sure we are going to talk about that, which is very critical. So you don't want to move data out. It's very non-performant, and also, for governance, you cannot govern your data if data is replicated, copied in many data silos.
Yeah, I think there's nothing unlimited. At the end of the day, you have to pay for it, right? I think you talked about the Snowflake earnings report. I think the average customer spends 71% more than this year than they did last year. So at some point, I think that becomes a limiting factor, right? How much are you willing to spend?
Well, that kind of brings me into a very poignant question, really, which is, with so much activity going on, also so many tools, so many different data engineering tools. There's people using traditional ETL tools. There's data fabric. There's self-service data prep. We're now talking about, well, it'll do Python. Let's run Python in the database. Let's run Scala in the database. Let's put R in the database. And it just seems to me, though, that with all of this going on in so many different tools, certainly as an analyst, I get to talk to CFOs. And a lot of them are they have no idea what the invoice is going to be like at the end of the month here. And so the question really is when does it become a point? How does a CFO get control of this whole data and analytics ecosystem going on top of all of this? Do you see any help there for these guys? Because I think for a lot of what I'm seeing now, there's been some very interesting articles that I, even just 2 weeks ago, one on the internet in Datanami that I pulled out, seeing CFOs really beginning to complain about this issue. So, in a tight economy, it's kind of weak. Do you not see that as an issue?
Well, in the hyperscale segment, there's just a lot of things that are different. Because up at that segment, every customer is the size of a cloud. Every application is the size of a cloud. And not only is the feature and the architecture optimized for that problem versus kind of the middle of the market being different, the pricing model is different. So the way that our customers have been buying from us is not on a per usage basis, which makes sense if your usage is elastic or relatively small. But if you're hammering away all day on cluster of clusters, you want to price based on the core, which is kind of the old model. So kind of like client server finding its way back. We're seeing our customers, they want to know in advance what it's going to cost so they can plan for it. And they don't want to be disincented from using it more and more because it'll cost more and more. So that in our market, that's what we've been asked to do, is to respond through our pricing model as a way of putting control on cost.
Yeah, so I think one way to see it is, every organization wants to become really data-driven, wants to make decisions based on data, and of course, it really pushes a lot of computation to that data. So the CFO that you were mentioning, right? They have to think about that, right? It's about, the CFO is at the service of its company. So somewhere it's very important for every organization to really focus on data. And I believe the cloud and the elasticity, because you consume only what you use, is the most cost-effective way, to do that. And you can do much more, much at a lesser cost. Now, of course, if you're on premise and you can only use, a few servers, you cannot do a lot, and your costs are going to be bounded. But is it good? It's probably not good, right? So now, saying that, we have to help the CFO and the organization at large to understand where money is spent, to really control, to define budgets, and really have a way to charge back, for example, the different business units, and be very transparent on where the cost is going. Because if there is something that you don't really has no value, you don't use it, you should not, do that, right? So you have to have, what we call cost governance, very strong cost governance, and all our customers, when they start, we say you have to place, guardrails and this cost governance. You cannot just, it's not free lunch, right?
Right.
Because it's so easy to consume. You have to consume only for what you can pay, obviously. But coming back on premise would not be the right, thing to do.
Okay.
I would say that because you can infinitely scale, infinitely run compute however you want, technically that is now what cloud infrastructure really supports. It's more important than ever to track usage and monitor how things are actually going, not just as a one-time cost reduction initiative, but something that actually runs continuously. So that if you have a dashboard that is running on like a regular cadence, but nobody's looking at it anymore for the last 6 months, it's just better to deprecate that dashboard and the pipeline itself, so you can actually save the compute. This is not it wasn't necessarily an intended use case, but it is a use case that a lot of our customers use Select Star for, because we give them a lot of this usage patterns and how that is related to your data warehouse cost versus your BI cost, and whether there is actually an end user looking at the report and utilizing the data set.
Okay.
So you're saying if a tree falls in the forest and no one sees it, the CFO doesn't want to pay for it?
I like the analogy.
Yeah. I mean, you can always get it back up, but there are clearly a lot of companies are sitting on top of data that's only being used 5 to 10%. But one is, but how can we actually encourage everyone to utilize more of that data? And then on the other hand, you will also find out there are a lot of inefficient use of data, either because it's not relevant anymore, or maybe the very first time the pipeline was designed, it also wasn't very optimized. So there are a lot of opportunities that you can actually carve out to, reduce your cloud data cost overall.
And by the way, it was an existing problem even in traditional data warehouse, single cluster, right? When we migrate, for example, Teradata to Snowflake, customers, they discover that there are a lot of workloads that are not used. So they migrate, only a subset because a lot of things are not used. So it's not, new.
Yeah.
I think you're making an assumption, though, that all of these workloads that are running in that data warehouse are really useful. And I think that in practice, what happens is you're paying so much to load the data, you're paying so much to transform it. Every time a new user or a new use case comes up, you're creating a summarized version of that table and a pre-joined version of that table, and this aggregated, pre-aggregated, and all these different copies, and the ingestion and the clustering that's happening underneath it. I think that's the majority of what you're paying, right? So, for us, a big focus has been on how do we get to a world where you're not copying data all the time? So we've built all these query acceleration technologies that are transparent, and so that you're not constantly, churning through data that's not for reasons that aren't really adding value to the business.
Let me just ask the audience, how many of you are concerned about the cost of the cloud?
I am.
Quite a few. All seem to be on this side of the house. Okay, all right, thank you. I mean, just wanted to take a...
No, it's a very big focus, and providing the data, the monitoring, the governance of cost is a big focus for I believe all of us at different level.
Okay, all right. Let's turn our attention to something that I see is happening in data warehouse development. If I look at the kind of last decade, we've seen a complete transition from how software developers built things. We went from monolithic to microservices. And these days, it's all component-based development. You build different developers working on different components. If you want to change something, you can change it independently. You can test it independently. You can maintain it independently. All these kind of things. But it does seem kind of, certainly in the last 12 months at least, within data and analytics, we've really seen the kind of, let's say, software development approach almost gate crash the data and analytics world, and kind of say, well, you guys are doing it all wrong with this traditional approach. You should be really building it the way we build apps. And so we've seen a whole slew of technology announcements of tool vendors going to Git. And it's all about put your code in here, and we'll handle it all with CI/CD, and we'll shorten your development times.
Yeah.
But it's kind of ironic that I've sat for more than 15 years and watched data warehouse automation vendors shortening development times. And yet we seem to be, and that was metadata driven, and they generated stuff. And yet we seem to be ignoring that and going, oh, code, everything, put everything in as code. And so I'm kind of, do you think, is this the new world order? I mean, is this the way in which you think analytical systems should be built? Or is this just software developers just trying to gate crash the party?
Well, yeah, those tools are really good. That's why people use them. And I think the other trend that we've been seeing, if we were sitting here in the great debate, 15 years ago, there probably would have been discussion, is SQL dead? Because there was a period where
I've heard that discussion.
the cool kids didn't do SQL
I've heard
anymore.
that discussion the whole of my career.
Every year.
But it seems like it is not only back, it is just taken over. I mean, it's the language, and it is a large, complex language that needs those kind of tools. It's not simple little script files we're writing. We're writing some pretty interesting SQL statements.
I mean, you're even getting BI tools now, integrating with all the Git and CI/CD stuff. We're getting data modeling tools, generating SQL and putting all that in there. But it all seems to be bring your tool, put your code in there, we'll handle it all with CI/CD. I mean, and so it takes you into the world of component-based development and collaborative development, and a lot more sprints and all that kind of stuff that we see in traditional software development, application development. I mean, do you think that's here to stay?
I think there's a reason all those things became popular, right? You see it not just in the world of data, but you see it in other areas, right? You see it in DevOps, right? You have infrastructure as code now, security, right? SecDevOps and DevSecOps, and so it's everywhere, right? People want that integration with GitHub. They want to check it in. They want to collaborate that way. I think we even see this extending to data itself, not just the metadata and kind of the modeling of data, but we have an open source project we created called Nessie that's all about data as code and GitHub for data, right? So I think that's the future, is being able to do isolation, right? How do I work with data and I ingest it and transform it in a separate branch and then integrate it? How do I version control, right? You can go in in Snowflake, you can go in Iceberg and in Dremio, you can go back in time, right? So all these capabilities that you have in software are critical in the world of data as well.
But I mean, isn't there a chance that we have like a Git repo graveyard? I mean, there's just thousands of these things all over the place, or we have all of these components and they're just lying all over the place, being produced by all these tools, and then have a new labyrinth on our hands? I mean, is that not what we're looking at here?
Well, when you say like thousands of these tools lying around, what that sounds to me like is a very good programming library. I mean, that's like if you're writing in C++ or Java, that's what you want. You don't want to have to reinvent,
of course,
the 10,000 things you got to do every time you write anything.
Absolutely, you want to reuse it all right. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think Git, one of the things it's great at is keeping that fresh and maintaining and evolving and give you clues on like, that's really old, don't look at that. This is what everybody's using these days.
But it does put a big, I guess, change on organization of all of that development in order to keep it in,
To me, it's really more about making that data, whether that came from your application or CRM or your ERP systems, to be available and make it available in other tools, so that operations can utilize that data to do something else, or for the HR can use this to, I don't know, collect other types of data and add to it. In the past, without these no code or many different applications that can easily connect to these application data, you have to use that tool in order to add or edit any of the entries. You cannot merge it with other types of data. And now that is all possible, and I think that's why we see this explosion of apps that can be created on top of any data set.
I mean, I would add also, I mean, why? You're asking, okay, why all of a sudden things are changing, and is it just just a fashion, or is it, there is a reason? And I think fundamentally the reason is the data products are very different from the past, right? In the past, you were creating dashboards for your, CEOs and the C-level, people, and first there was it was not, a production. If that thing doesn't work well, it's okay, right? It's the operation of your company doesn't depend on that, right? Now you are building full data products which needs to be available, needs to be tested, and the CI/CD pipeline allows you to test and make sure that they work, and so you are writing production code, right? And if Snowflake, we use our own analytical platform, but I can tell you, if there is a problem, if we have data quality issue, it will be catastrophic for us, because all our production operation, I mean, many of them depend on that platform. So I think the type of data products that you build is very different now than from the past. As I said, data are becoming data driven, and the entire enterprise runs from their data, and a lot of automated flows, right? It's not human based. So I think the nature of the game has changed.
Okay, but then given that if the focus is no longer on a monolithic data model,
yes,
and the focus is on data products, we better get good at making sure we have global identifiers to be able to snap these things together like Lego bricks, otherwise we're kind of in trouble here, right? I mean, but do you not think, does that mean therefore that the concept of data mesh, which kind of opened up the debate about, do you think that's here to stay? I mean, some other analysts, dare I say it, have already considered it obsolete.
I'm very bullish on the data mesh, and Snowflake has enabled this collaboration cross organization. People think about data mesh as big organization having several business units, and they create this data product, and this is the way they communicate and interconnect. But data mesh goes beyond that, right? We have full data mesh products created through the marketplace, connecting different companies together, and this needs to be tested, right? I'm selling my data, monetizing my data, and these data products they cannot fail, right?
Yeah.
So you need this next level of development, rigor, testing, having version control, knowing when changes are made, reviewing changes. Okay, in the old days, you go to your data system and you do alter, command, and you change, live, this data pipeline. That cannot happen anymore, right? You have to have source control. You have to have a review process. You have to deploy this change. First, you test them, then you deploy them on production, right? So this rigor, because you are building application all the way to application, you mentioned it.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. But then, equally at the same time, if we're doing that, especially around data engineering and all of this, we've now got, they're all here on the exhibition floor. We got all kinds of tools that we can do data engineering with, and sort of best of breed tools everywhere. And people often refer to best of breed as agile, right? And then we also have the other option, which is the kind of data fabric, the battle for the data fabric software, where we've now got a situation where we've got, should we put everybody on a common platform to build pipelines? I mean, what would you say it is? Is it best of breed, or is it a common sort of data fabric? Because quite clearly some of the largest vendors are going after the fabric business, whilst there's lots of smaller vendors out here on the exhibition floor, looking at best of breed. So, if we are going to go component-based development, is it a best of breed thing, and control it all with Git and version control and CI/CD, or is it data fabric, or does it not matter?
What I see here is that you have the rise now of open formats of data. So, and that's been going through an evolution, right? We got 10 years ago, maybe Parquet was created like as an open source kind of columnar format, and then all the different engines, everybody here probably supports that, and of course we do. And more recently, Netflix came up with Apache Iceberg, right? And then Apple's a big contributor to that, and we supported Amazon now. It's their table format. Snowflake supports that. So I think the rise of these common table formats, that will be the common denominator on which lots of different things can be built, right? And that includes, engines, us providing, a SQL query engine that's extremely fast and has acceleration and things like that. It's, other streaming technologies that are built on that. It's, Spark engines, all sorts of types of processing that you can do when you have a shared kind of table format. And so I think the rise of Iceberg and other table formats in the last year or two, I think that's going to be game-changing for the industry.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, to your question, I think it's an hybrid, right? The platform, the data platform, is responsible, for storing the data and ensuring, all the governance of that data, securitization and all of these. The tools, it doesn't mean that everything is happening and is developed by this data platform. Actually being very open and having tools connecting to that platform and pushing their computation inside the platform is really critical. So yes, you use the best tool, but the best tool doesn't mean that you have to take data, move it to that tool, and that tool, would process that data. What it means is that you use that tool, and that tool, can push the compute, towards the data, whether it picks, SQL, or it picks Python, Java, Scala, or more. And I think the platform is responsible for the governance, the performance, the scalability of the system, making sure that two different workloads are not competing for resources. So this is the way cloud is scaling. So it's an hybrid combination. But I think it's very important that the platform has custody of the data, that compute is pushed where the data is, that you don't move data out of the platform, because then you have a security issue and governance issue. And these tools, are enabled by the platform. So this is why, for us, for Snowflake, and I'm sure for Dremio, having a very rich computational, system inside the platform is important, such that tools can really run inside Snowflake, not outside.
Yeah. But I guess what I see is, we do have, as we've already discussed, a lot of tools integrating with the likes of GitHub and CI/CD and all that kind of thing going on. But, there's also productivity that can come another way, and that is sharing metadata, right? And, I have to say, I'm 40 years in the industry now, and I've seen 3 attempts at coming up with a metadata standard all fail. And there's a kind of 4th one underway at the moment, which I mentioned in my opening session this morning, which is Egeria. And we've now also seen this open lineage initiative started to emerge. And I kind of think, well, come on, these are open source initiatives. Egeria is 100% open source. We've even got banks committing code to all of this to get behind it, in order to allow metadata to share between tools, so you don't have to rekey it in again and do all of that work and slow it all down. So, do you not think that isn't it about time that vendors started taking note of standards, rather than, let's say, not going to give up their metadata because they want to, it seems to me more of a defensive thing from a vendor point of view, but from a customer point of view, I can't tell you the number of times customers have said to me, God, I wish those guys would share metadata. It would save me so much time and effort.
Yeah.
So, how do you see that playing out? Is it just bring your own tool and it's code and that's the end of it? Or do you think we really will see, vendors adopting a distributed metadata open source initiative like Egeria in the future?
I think the thing that's going to push it over the edge this time, maybe not 100%, but more adoption than those prior attempts, is just the scale of metadata and the scale of data in general that people analyze. Back when you could like maybe figure out how to transform from this metadata format to that metadata format, and it's just a little bit of data, it's not a big deal. Well, if it's 10 trillion things a month, it's millions of dollars just to do that transformation. And so I think that's really what's going to drive it, because so many of these data sets are so large, with 5G coming out, with cars getting digitized, with all these things happening. It just becomes, it used to be you could just kind of do that off to the side, but now the stakes are so high in getting that efficient that I think customers are going to demand it.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of still haven't seen 100 banks get together and say, what are you guys going to do? We're not going to buy anything until you do it. But you kind of think frustration's building, and it's been building a hell of a long time here, and yet we just don't seem to be enough momentum. Some vendors have already committed to this kind of stuff, but certainly a lot have not, and so you still then are reliant on, well, have got this combination of vendors, well, have they got partnerships, have they got their APIs working and stitching it together that way, or paying systems integrators to come up with some custom code to be able to do it? I mean, it just seems to be, I don't really get why, I mean, given that most of the code to connect to this framework is done already, you have adapters to just connect to it, and you don't have to build a gazillion. I can remember a previous panelist of this, Gaurav Dhillon, who was the original co-founder of Informatica, and now, of course, is the CEO of SnapLogic. I remember once he said to me, if at Informatica, I think it was, I'll never do all of these connectors again. And when he went to SnapLogic, he got the community to build the connectors, because the cost of constantly updating them and keeping them in step with changes around it was a nightmare. So I'm just kind of curious, because I think there's a lot of customers out there would really love to see it.
Well, as a company building a metadata platform and having to build connectors for every single database, data warehouses, lakes, and BI tools, this is a lot of work. And the part that we see from integrating into so many different data tools is that a lot of this metadata coming from different tools are actually very much inherited also with the way that the product works, how the data model is also designed within that product. So in a way, trying to standardize like everything under one umbrella is just, almost impossible. And I think with open standards and with enough heavy players contributing to the same standards, I think that can definitely be possible for something like relational databases that's like a little bit more has more common terminologies and the way of systems that we're all familiar with. For BI tools and ETL tools, I think it just has some way to go. Yeah. Unfortunately.
I very agree, actually. I'm very pessimistic, sorry. No, I'm pessimistic and optimistic at the same time, in the sense that I think the difference is that it's maybe less needed, because in the old days, you had all these different systems that were completely disjoined, as data silos, so you had to understand the data, you had to connect to all these systems at once. Now there is these platforms which are being created, Snowflake being one of them, and this gives the opportunity to collapse this data into one single form, and relational and API. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit torn with the file access, direct file access, because you don't have any abstraction around it. But at least SQL and APIs, which are much more normalized, allows you to provide this access and unify this data, which are coming from different sources and different places, unify them, and being able to query this data in that unified place. So versus, trying to create a distributed system. Let's put the data in one single place, one single format, and where metadata actually is unified in this system. And I think that's possible now because, again, before it was stupid to put all the data in one single place because that means all the compute had to run in one single place, which would not scale. Now it's feasible. And I think the platform will exist, one single platform, and then all the many tools, but a lot of things, the metadata will be pushed in the platform, in the end. And we provide, for example, Snowflake provide tags. You can define, all this metadata. You can tag columns and put, semantic attributes, that is used by all these tools to leverage, to create.
But at the same time, if we're going down a road of software development practices and everybody's working on components and code and everything like that, I mean, one of the things that software developers were never exactly keen on was data modeling. I mean, it's like, well, screw the data model. I mean, let's just stuff it all in files and we'll process it that way. I mean,
yeah.
do you think, with all of this component-based development, that data modeling has just gone out the window? I mean, it's like, well, who cares about Kimball? Who cares about Data Vault? Which are like ingrained into data warehousing around the world. In Europe, very big on Data Vault. In US, still Kimball, I think, reigns supreme over there. But, I mean, data modeling is the heart of all of that. I mean, do you think that's just out the window? We talked about data products. But, data products are going to have to snap together quickly if we want to assemble this and make it more rapid development.
Yeah, I think it's because of the data products are way more complicated than just, putting things in a star schema. I mean, all this Data Vault, Kimball was about, star schema. I have a star schema, and I'm going to build nice dashboards, right? I mean, it's important. I don't want to say dashboards are not important anymore. It exists, and when you have to do that, Kimball is a great book. I don't like too much Data Vault for some reasons, but I like Kimball, and it will be used. But when you build a full data product or data application which is going to run, inside this platform, you have, it's not enough, right? So you have to use, software development and all.
But what I
technology.
was kind of thinking was that data products are almost like data model components, that you can sort of snap together and assemble them into a data model.
I think it's much more finished product than a data model, right? I mean, you're right. There is, and there are discussions, right, when depending on the industry and the vertical, to have a format, how to present customer data, right? To unify that because of the market, place where you can share these data sets. And so this unification is useful, but it's at a higher level of model, right, than the Kimball. So, yeah, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not a big
I don't
fan.
think data modeling is out the window.
You don't?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Every time you're setting up a
Come
new
on, I'm
data
waiting for
warehouse.
the cheers from the data modelers. Where are you guys? I mean,
Yeah. Every time you're setting up a new BI tool, whenever you are running a big analytics project, this is like a core of how to make our data actually reusable and actually approachable and used by multiple divisions, not just for this specific use case. Right? The part, though, and the reason why we feel like data modeling is not as important is because the way that we use data today is so much more decentralized than ever, where different teams have their own analysts and analytics engineers creating different pipelines and transformations. It's really hard to keep track everything into manual documentation of this is the data model or here's the ERD. And I think this is one of the reasons why we try to bring out a lot of these visualizations of data model automatically out of SQL queries that have happened or any of the keys that we see from the data warehouse. And frankly, how does the data actually move from one place to another through like column level lineage? And I think that is now the way to go. You should definitely start with a really good data model as a great blueprint. But as more teams and data engineers add different, models and ways to process data, those also needs to keep up with what's the latest and how things are actually now being processed. And I think having a place to go and having a place to keep track automatically is really the way to go here.
Okay. All right, so then let's turn our attention more to the sort of phenomenon of data catalogs, which of course would be right up your street, Shinji, but I mean, we've seen data marketplaces, data observability now as a new category that's emerged, the whole data governance scene. I'm not so sure about US, but certainly in Europe, it seems that governance is now getting, it's always been pretty high on the agenda, obviously, since GDPR emerged, but it just seems to be going up and up and up in the priority list, and so, we're now sort of seeing catalogs generating statistics about data quality even, so automatic data quality profiling. We've got automatic data classification. We've got automatic data discovery going on. But, how do you see these things like, we're now dealing with it, ironically, seems to be getting a worse, more distributed data out there in all kinds of places. And yet it's kind of interesting to me that you're talking about, oh, put it all on one platform, when it seems to me it's just spreading everywhere. But I mean, if you're trying to govern this, and a lot of companies are on the hook for all kinds of legislation and compliance these days, not necessarily just here in Europe, but in multiple countries. I mean, how do you see catalogs and observability and governance coming together? I mean, are these just like different tools and you got to figure it out yourself? Or I mean, like, to me, I think the holy grail here is almost like antivirus. You just want governance to be running in the background automatically, right? I mean, it just kind of takes care of things, right? I mean, so how do you see it coming together? Shinji, why don't we talk to you, since you're right in the heart of this, right?
Sure. I think catalog, observability, governance, they are all really important pillars of data platform that a lot of companies are looking to adopt and implement today. Overall, I mean, when you're thinking about traditional data catalog approach, it's been more or less inventorying all the things that you have because you have so many disparate data sources. But it's primarily just so that you have one place to go to search for specific data, not necessarily to understand how to use that data. The way that modern data catalogs and discovery platforms work, like SelectStar, is really around how to give more insights of how the data can be used by telling you which are the most important data, how many people are using it, where these data came from, and how it's currently being used today, which I think is a really important part. So catalog is more of a means to an end, but the end goal is increasing the discoverability of data so that more data consumers, whether they are technical or not, they should be able to easily learn and use that data. So I actually see more discovery than catalog. Whereas for observability, I think this is a new area that has been formed because of a lot of the reliance that now we have on the business side with data. If the pipeline breaks down or if the dashboard number looks a little bit off, that could really be a meaningful defect for the business as well. So I see a lot of the observability. We have a lot of customers that uses our data discovery platform along with a separate observability platform. And the observability platform really comes in to help the data engineers and IT.
Do you think observability is going to trigger more automated governance in the future? If we're collecting all of this data, monitoring things as they execute, monitoring data flowing through pipelines, et cetera. I mean, is that going to trigger that data going into machine learning models? We're going to see automated governance coming out of that?
It is something that is closely related to data quality, right? So I think there is, but it is still around meeting the SLA of the data and making sure that you're being alerted upfront whenever something breaks down. So that's why I think, but when I think about data governance, the whole purpose of data governance is to make data trustworthy and is used in the right way, meaning having the organization data under control. So it's a lot more than just tracking the quality. It's also about managing and organizing the data
quality.
So that
governance has gone into privacy, it's gone into sharing, it's gone into access security, it's into retention, it's into loss prevention.
Exactly.
This umbrella has just like exploded in width, right? I mean, so if all of that's going on, I mean, the hardest problem is not so, and we're even seeing policies now being defined in catalogs, even if it's multiple teams around the business building those policies and putting in the catalogs. But that's okay. Just defining the policy is easy. Enforcing it across all of those different data stores, that's a nightmare. And I was just kind of curious, as we get to the end of the debate, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think this enforcement problem, I don't think any vendor's got an answer to being able to do that. Well, I guess you're going to tell me,
it
put
is
it all in the middle and
impossible.
do it
You're
all.
right. No, you're right. If you have in different data stores and use 10, 20 different database system, all siloed, then you'll have this nightmare problem, and you will not be able to solve it.
Right.
Now, if you define governance in a very centralized way, enforced by the platform, I think it's a much more tractable problem. I mean, and we. To your point of discovering data automatically with machine learning, we do a lot of work on PI data, right? Identifying PI data, tagging, data sets which contain PI data, so columns, in table or attributes in semi-structured data, and then, propagating these PI, tags, across data sets such that you can see that you are duplicating this PI data that you should not. So that's also important.
Okay. All right.
I think leaving the data in place in for us, object storage primarily, right, and not having to move it into all these other systems, that's a key part of governance, because once you started to create copies, once you start, you move that data, you put it in a warehouse, you put it in a Tableau extract, you put it in people's spreadsheets, and now it's all over the place, right? You've created all these copies of data and potentially copies in the data warehouse itself, but each of those has its own access control, its own columns. The permissions don't travel with the data, and that just becomes a nightmare. So I think the fewer copies you can have, and that's kind of our big focus, is
all right.
more
Okay.
security.
So let's just wrap up then with just one final question. I mean, you're the technologists. You guys know what's going on in your own R&D and everything and like that. So what advice would you give to the companies out here that are trying to look to the future, in their crystal ball and kind of say, well, where should they be investing in the next 12 months? I mean, what do you see as the hard problems that, when there's technology, about your own R&D as to what's coming to solve these kind of problems? What kind of direction can you give the audience here at the show?
Well, I would speak to scale. So what we generally see in a lot of customer environments is the amount of data that their customers make is inevitably accelerating. And as an IT professional, you don't get to say, no, that's 10 times as much as I had to deal with just a couple years ago and my budget hasn't increased. You have to find a way. So you have to think in terms of just imagine yourself with 10 times as much of what you have now. So what you have to have is something that is just structurally efficient. Any kind of inefficiencies you have today will get exposed because it's going to scale and you can't stop it.
I would say keep the data open, keep it in open source formats so that you're not, and really vendor agnostic formats so that you're not locked into a single vendor. And so today, obviously we aim to provide the best lakehouse platform, the best SQL query engine, but in 5 years there'll be something you'll find better. I mean, you'll want to try other things out, and so being able to point that at that same data that you have in object storage and
surely
try it
SQL
out.
will be dead, right?
SQL will still be
How many
around.
times have we heard that one, right? Okay, Benoit?
Yeah, I mean, my take is, I mean, you say, what will be your advice to companies? I would say first think about data and put data at the center of your strategy and, be really data driven. And that starts with, unsiloing data and having one single platform where you have all your data, where you make decisions. Because if you want to build, complex, ML models and you want to do complex analytics, you have to combine this data. And this is not only your data, by the way. It's, a lot of data coming from the outside, right? From outside of your organization, right? The COVID pandemic, all of a sudden, companies wanted to understand COVID, and because it had a huge impact on their business. So how to get data is the number one priority, and then governance is the second priority. And having a platform that scale, and that's, because otherwise you are dead. If the platform doesn't scale, then don't put your data in that platform.
All right.
All right, two things. One, try to understand how the data is actually being consumed in your organization. So many people are just continuing to use their data platform without really understanding how things are going. And when they look at it later, they are surprised by how little they are using the data and where it's being used. The second part is making that context of what that, how this table can be used or who's already using it, things like that. That context to make it available to other team members in data, which will increase the productivity of everyone so much higher. So.
All right. Well then, that's really great input. So thank you all very much, and to everybody for coming to the Great Data Debate. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.